Regulations, a fantastic idea that sounds fair and just for most of the people because they believe that market flaws should be controlled, of course, by the government, who is always in our best interest. Without government regulations, most people believe that the rich will get richer while the poor will get poorer. So in order to dissolve economic inequality, we need regulations. Now, it turns out that recently, most of the people advocating for regulations, either in the United States, Europe, or Latin America, now agree upon the fact that regulations do not end poverty. They are only effective in at least dissipating inequality. And dissipating inequality means making people more equally poor rather than letting people get richer. So, although it sounds like a great idea, regulations have been implemented time after time, and their results turn out to be not as good as expected. Turns out that when regulations are implemented, they distort markets and they create oligarchies, elites who get protected due to these regulations until the point where they don't compete equally, harming others into entering the market. Now, before we go to that, let's understand and remember what Ludwig von Mises said about prices. Prices work like the lights on a street, red, yellow, and green. And these signals, in order to work properly, need to float freely from one end of the society to the other end, from the offer to the demand. In the moment that prices are regulated or controlled, the signal system gets absolutely distorted, and we have no longer a true reference of what is the amount of money that people are willing to pay for a product. Every time that legislators try to mess up the price system, they create a scarcity because they decide by a law or a decree that some product needs to be under its productive line in order to be sold or acquired. And this inevitably creates a scarcity. The same happens with regulations. It is originally a form of protecting the weak against the strong in a market, but in reality, it ends up harming the weak and privileging the people who get a benefit in the short term for this regulation. So in order to understand what happens in regulations when they are actually implemented, let's talk about the 7 principles of sound economic policy by Lawrence Reed from the Foundation of Economic Education, and how he explains that every regulation violates these principles of sound economic policy, ending up in inevitable disaster. So the first principle is that free people are not equal and equal people are not free. In order for people to thrive as free individuals, inequality must be accepted. Inequality of talents, inequality of interest, inequality of opportunities. It is because we are unequal that we can benefit from trading with each other, and therefore, through the market, with peace and non-violence, try to make our lives better, getting in the market the things that we cannot do by ourselves because we don't have the talents in order to produce all the goods and services that makes our lives better. Now, regulations try to equalize everybody's opportunities in the market, but unfortunately, the result ends up being that just a group of people gets benefited from a small amount of time, whereas the majority of the people get harmed by these regulations. Look, for example, at the regulations that prohibit Latin Americans from trading with the European Union. Regulations in the European Union to wine, cheese, fruits, and vegetables end up producing certain oligarchies inside the European Union trade agreement, and they do not compete effectively with other parts of the world. At the same time, it harms the possibility of producers of fruits and vegetables in Latin America and Africa who could trade, benefiting the European consumer with better products that could be cheaper, but because of regulations, you are stuck with only one kind of product, all in the name of protecting the national industry. In this way, people get equalized with a very mediocre offer of some product, while in the long run, they get harmed by the opportunity cost of not getting other products that could be better and cheaper for them. So, principle number 2 is what belongs to you, you tend to take care of. What belongs to no one or everyone tends to fall into disrepair. Regulations are implemented under the idea that this is all for the national good. And national good sounds like it's going to benefit everybody. But in reality, it doesn't benefit the national consumer, who could then have the freedom to choose from different products from around the world with the ones that benefit them and are better for the amount of money that they're willing to pay. So instead of empowering the national consumer, regulations end up taking that power away from that consumer. The third principle that crushes with regulations is that sound policy requires that we consider long-run effects and all of the people, not simply short-run effects and a few people. Like Ronald Reagan used to say, there is nothing more permanent than a temporary government regulation. It turns out that most economists understand that regulations are harmful for the economy in the long run, because they only benefit a certain sector of the society in expense of the rest of the society. But once a regulation is implemented, it is very difficult to take it out. Look, for example, at the regulations of the FDA, and during the pandemic, how these regulations had to be violated in order to get the vaccine to more people, and how innovations and the fact that people should be free to make the decisions on how they can or they want to acquire certain health products or health alternatives for their immune system gets absolutely distorted by the fact that regulations stop them from getting to certain treatments. The principle number 4 is that if you encourage something, you get more of it. If you discourage something, you get less of it. What regulations encourage is less free market, less competitiveness, and in the long run, what ends up happening with regulations is that you have stagnation, you have less innovation, you have less products available for more people in the market. And then, coincidentally, you get monopolies. Because regulations protect certain industries from the laws of the market, then you have a certain group of people who are benefiting from that. Look, for example, what happened with the cases of Uber or Airbnb in countries where the taxi mafia or the hotel mafia didn't want to liberate the market in order to make these apps available to the consumer. Well, what ended up happening is that you get these monopolies and these industries regulated and protected by the government, completely secured and absolutely impenetrable from the forces of the market, until the point where consumers have no choice. They can protest or they can ask for the governments to take out those regulations, but in some countries, these apps are still restricted. So instead of regulations making the little guy more effective, what ends up happening is that it gives more power to the big guys, to the old monopolies, and making life difficult for innovation and new technologies to get to the people who are in more need of it. The principle number 5 that regulations hamper is that nobody spends somebody else's money as carefully as he spends his own. When there are no regulations in place, people are forced to make market decisions with the money that they have. With regulations in place, there are taxpayers' money that is going to benefit some industries at the expense of those consumers. And when this happens, you distort the incentives of doing the right thing, the productive thing with the money that you are getting. The 6th principle that regulations hamper with is that government has nothing to give anybody except what it first takes from somebody. And a government that is big enough to give you everything you want is big enough to take away everything you've got. Understanding regulations as opportunity cost is crucial. We have to remember Bastiat and what he said in the seen and the not seen. People praise regulations because they think they are saving certain market groups. What they are not seeing is the opportunity costs that are getting missed and are getting lost because of those regulations in place. Most of the companies that people think are too big to fail, such as banks, Tesla, Monsanto, Amazon, Facebook, unfortunately have a lobby that is asking for certain regulations that protect them from true free market economies. So it turns out that when people are complaining about companies being too big to fail, what they should also be complaining about is these companies getting certain privileges under regulations that make them too big to fail, precisely because they are outside of the market forces. The 7th principle is that liberty makes all the difference in the world. When there is liberty, there is no such thing as a long-term monopoly, because anybody at some point in the world can come and make competition out of it. That is exactly the same logic that makes some people ask for regulations. So in one end, people do understand that when there is competition, there is also the threat that someone can take your market share away from you and be more efficient into supplying some product or service better than you do. Now, that is what we should be praising if we really want the little guy having some opportunity in the market. But at the same time, the people that understand that someone can come and make a competition for them, they are the same ones that are asking for regulations, protecting themselves not from the big guys, but actually from the little guys, from the entrepreneurs that can come in the future and make their lives miserable, but by making competition of their own product. So if we think about it, regulations are the excuse of the people who want to be too big to fail, and they are asking for governments to please protect them from the markets that are more equal and more fair to everybody, because free markets allow opportunity for everybody to come and compete and innovate, equally treating everybody under the law. I am Gloria Álvarez, and this is for the Free Market Roadshow.